Hello, everyone. Thank you for logging into today's event. We're going to talk today about a topic that I've been dealing with for many years in this industry, and I enjoy it immensely. Today's topic is demystifying PR measurement. We've come to think of measurement as one of the most important elements of a solid communication strategy. But as many of us in PR still struggle with it, and not surprisingly so, it's because we as communicators don't really have data and measurement backgrounds or training. So today we're really excited to walk you through the what and the why and the how of PR measurement to demystify this concept once and for all. This webinar will be recorded and shared with registrants as well. So first, I am delighted to introduce our guest today. Please welcome Roman Vazirian. He is the Director of Global Brand PR Content and Multimedia at IHG Hotels and Resorts. Roman has over 15 years of experience in digital marketing with a strong focus on content, influencer marketing, and social media strategy. A native of France, he has worked for various PR agencies in Europe and in the US since joining IHG Hotels and Resorts in 2018. Roman has focused on building a team of creatives with a strong understanding of what makes PR very successful, and he loves working on reporting, social listening, community management, content creation, and editorial strategies. Welcome, Roman.
Thanks for the warm welcome, Greg. Hi, everyone.
Yeah. And I'm Greg D'Andrea. I'm the head of customer success North America here at Onclusive. With the new Onclusive, we're integrating Kantar Reputation Intelligence, the largest media monitoring and measurement service in Europe, with best-in-class media relations tools of PR Glue and powerful AI and data science of the original Onclusive to be a true global partner for success for PR and communications teams. During our time together today, we'll look at what PR measurement is and isn't, and why any communication strategy will benefit from starting with measurement in mind. We'll also review PR measurement framework examples and hear from Roman about the best practices used at IHG to measure communications effectiveness. To wrap up the content section of the webinar, we'll discuss how data and technology can support success measurement and get some tips from Roman on what to look for when you're selecting your PR measurement partner. We'll also have a Q&A session at the end. Definitely submit your questions throughout the presentation using the Zoom Q&A feature at the bottom there, and we'll address them all at the end. So let's get started with what we're talking about today, which is PR measurement. Historically, PR has been measured using a variety of metrics. Many of them we would consider to fall into the vanity metrics bucket, like article count, impressions, and even AVEs, or if you're not familiar, advertising value equivalents. Understandable if there is some confusion around what PR measurement really is. Here's how we define it. PR measurement is a set of standards and key performance indicators, or KPIs, that allow communicators to accurately and consistently evaluate performance and demonstrate the business value of PR while using insight from ongoing evaluation for strategy optimization and future planning. Now, I know that was a little bit of a mouthful, but Roman, I really do want to get your thoughts right off the bat here on why PR measurement standards have been essential at IHG.
Absolutely, Greg. Yeah, and I think I can list three main reasons right off the bat. So number one, for a global company like IHG, they're going to allow us to compare results across multiple brands, multiple regions, different business units, different agency partners even. And it's also important for us because we often have different goals for different brands, right? So it's going to be a bit different if we talk about luxury brands like Intercontinental, Kimpton, versus some mainstream brands like Holiday Inn, for instance. So really, measurement standards are going to help us compare apples to apples. Number two, instead of guessing, which we definitely never want to do as PR professionals, we're using consistent data over time to improve our performance. So I think there's nothing worse than not being able to compare results year over year, right? Because you didn't have standards in place. So you absolutely want to do that beforehand. And finally, and then we'll talk about this a lot more during the rest of the presentation, our executives and the board can see the continuity in the data and results over time, which in turn builds their confidence in the impact of communications and our work on our IHG brands, right? So it's one of the main ways. It's a starting point really to prove the value of PR.
Yeah, I mean, I think everything you said there was spot on, and especially number 3 around your, getting engagement with your board and buy-in. I think we're going to talk about that a little bit as this webinar goes on. But I mean, that's what we're seeing as well, right? Supporting PR decisions with data has really become an expectation from senior executives worldwide. I think historically in PR, we've seen a lot of us just be comfortable in our little corner of the organization, putting out fires, sending out press releases, and not really understanding how to get a seat at that table. So measuring helps you and your senior executives define, track, and prove the success of communications. This reality is really steering PR measurement towards being more and more aligned with organizational goals and business priorities, which we're also going to talk a little bit about. But for now, we want to hear from you guys out in our audience. We're going to pop up a poll. Please answer this one question, multiple choice poll, and later in the webinar, we'll share the results with all of you. The question is, how do you measure PR at your organization? So we're just going to take a moment to answer this poll. It's going to pop up right in your Zoom, and you're going to go ahead and answer it. Hopefully all of you will. And then we'll look at the results in a moment. So I think you've all had a chance to see the poll. I'll give you a second more to answer it, and then we'll move on here. Okay, so given that historically there were really no guidelines around PR measurement, AMAC, which of course is the International Association for Measurement and Evaluation of Communication, presented an industry-wide consensus on measurement and evaluation during the 2010 Barcelona Summit. And of course, many of you probably know this as the Barcelona Principles, which is what came out of that. They've been updated a couple times since 2010, which is crazy to me. That was 12 years ago now. And the latest and most recent update being the Barcelona Principles 3.0, which happened just a couple of years ago in 2020. These principles clearly state what PR measurement is and what it isn't. And the 4 key themes of the Barcelona Principles really are: 1, to reinforce the importance of setting goals in advance. 2, to then state that measurement should not just be about outputs like article count, but also about outcomes like true bottom line business impact. Thirdly, of course, as part of the Barcelona Principles, AMAC officially dismissed AVEs as a communications measurement, although I still do get questions every once in a while about that. And lastly, the true value of measurement is to inform how you optimize your strategies over time. So overall, measurement is an essential business process for every function at an organization because it helps you define success. It also helps you track how you're doing on your path towards achieving it, amplifying what works, and proving your value and contribution to your brand. I mean, going beyond the big picture, here are the specific reasons why we think measurement must be a foundational process in PR and communications. So number 1, measurement done right really does start with identifying what success looks like, which in many cases means winning the game maybe against your competition, or for example, growing your brand share of voice or power of voice, which Onclusive's proprietary PR quality metric is power of voice. Number 2, if you want to expand your team or increase the scope of your key initiatives, grow your budget, the best way to secure those additional resources is to show your C-suite that what you're doing is actually working. And preferably in a language that they can understand, right, with data. Number 3, without measurement, there is no innovation. Even something as simple as A/B testing of new messaging requires measurement. And these days, real-time tracking is needed to allow PR pros to pivot quickly under any conditions. And finally, strategic communications is a marathon. It's not a sprint. And ongoing measurement plays a key role in your long-term strategy. A robust measurement framework that tracks your KPIs over time can provide big picture views into the success of your long-term initiatives. So with all that being said, Roman, I want to push it over to you. What are your thoughts on why every communication strategy must really start with measurement in mind?
Yes, thanks, Greg. And I think the first 2 points on this slide are actually closely tied together and go hand in hand. I will say, so no two executive teams are alike, right? But they most likely have a common denominator, all of them, is that they speak the language of tangible results, business metrics. And I think that's why more and more PR professionals are being asked to become data-driven, right? Which is not something you were saying at the beginning that is maybe a given when you start your PR career. So I was reading a survey recently that showed that 85% of comms professionals reported having to defend strategic PR decisions with data. So really what it means is that saying, it's a great story, or even saying, oh, we generated, X million impressions is not enough anymore if you want to have a seat at the table. And so once you're past that, and that's point number 2, that's really when the magic happens. So once the value of PR has been proven, you can become a strategic advisor to your C-suite. So you'll be able, that's when you're able to contribute at a much higher level. You can help steer the overall direction of your brands, of your company. And you can only do that if you're armed with PR data and unique insights that no one else has. So I think that's really, really important. 2 other points. The first one, really, for anyone who's trying to get the best return out of their agencies, if you want an impactful PR agency client relationship, you need to align on key business, marketing, PR success metrics to really clarify your expectations about the level of support you need from your PR agency, right? I'm always surprised by the number of, I have a lot of friends working for agencies still, and the number of people who tell me, well, we don't really have any KPIs. So how can you manage an agency this way, right? It's bad for the client and it's bad for the agency. So we should all try to be better and not do that. And last but not least, and this one is a bit more of a given, right? But measuring the effectiveness of your campaigns reveal what's working and what's not, right? So it's going to help you adjust your tactics during a campaign, right? You can shift your strategy a bit mid-campaign live, and also shape the future of your upcoming PR strategies.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and we're gonna dive into that a little bit later when we do a little bit of a case study from one of your recent campaigns, Roman. I think it'll kind of show what you mean here. I think we've got some poll results here. So thanks to everyone who participated. Let's pop those poll results up and see what. So track volume, coverage, reach, impressions, and share of voice. So some of those vanity metrics are in there. Is by far 62% how folks out there in this webinar are tracking their PR measurement. What's interesting to me is, look at that, 2% there, Roman, bottom line impact, website conversions and sales. I know we're not quite there yet. I hope that some of you start thinking about maybe a little bit more of how to tie those things, how to tie PR and comms efforts into bottom line conversions, especially with metrics like PR attribution, which Onclusive has to measure traffic back to your website from earned media. But just interesting results there, but not overly surprising.
Not surprising, but so interesting, right? And I think there's a bit of a stigma maybe with PR teams, and a lot of us still think, oh wow, it's we're top of the sales funnel. It's impossible to track website conversions, to track sales, starting with PR. And I feel like a lot of people still think that, but it is possible now with the right technology. So I know we'll talk about this a bit later on, but yeah, interesting results for sure.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you again, everyone. So now that we've covered the what of PR measurement and the why of it being an essential element of every communication strategy, we're going to shift gears a little bit and talk about the how. Like, how do you actually establish and implement PR measurement in modern communications? So first things first, a measurement framework is essential. What is a measurement framework? Rather than simply a set of metrics, tools, or initiatives, a framework like the one you're seeing here on this screen creates a systematic way to collect the right data, analyze the data to understand communication performance, extract insights for continuous improvement of PR strategies and tactics, and demonstrate the value of communications. So the one here is AMAC's Integrated Evaluation Framework, which uses the concepts of outputs, outtakes, outcomes, and impact to support you in setting your goals, developing your PR plan, and determining your success metrics. We definitely urge you to check out this framework on the AMAC website. I've looked at it a fair amount. They really do have an intuitive way to organize your goals and strategies. You just type in your answers for each of these. And then at some point, when you get your results back, you can pop those in there too, and print out a presentation right from their website to show your internal stakeholders. So they really do a good job at AMAC with creating this framework and allowing everyone to access it and be able to really organize your thoughts around your goals. Here at Onclusive, we've also developed a framework to reliably measure real business impact of earned, owned, and newswire media content across the entire customer journey. So each step in this framework is aligned to specific metrics that help to determine the quality, resonance, influence, and bottom line impact of every media article. So for example, content quality is about going deeper than just measuring the volume of media coverage, right? We've talked about that already today, but really about measuring the quality of your content. That's essential because not all content is created equally. Think about, whether you got a feature mention or just a passing mention at the bottom of an article. This is an example of an output on, say, the AMAC framework. Now, engagement is important too. Press coverage does not equal engagement, right? I mean, measuring if anyone is actually consuming your content, and if so, how much and for how long they are reading it, that can be really insightful, and that's engagement. This would be an example of, say, an outtake on the AMAC framework. Influence. How did your content shape the opinions of the reader, and how did it impact your brand sentiment and consideration? As a longer-term effect of communication, this would be considered an outcome. And I think something that all of us can really focus on a bit more in our PR measurement, right? And then finally, actions, right? This is a business outcome that your content drove and the results that you saw, including website traffic, signups, sales, revenue, the business impact of your communications activity, basically. So Onclusive has some proprietary metrics, like we've discussed, power of voice and PR attribution, to measure each one of these stages of the customer journey. We call these metrics that matter because they're tied to your KPIs, and these are things that resonate with your C-suite. They can help your executive team to understand the true impact of communications on organizational success, while arming you with the data-driven insights that you can use to be a strategic advisor to them. And in other words, I mean, this type of data can really get you a seat at the table for the long term, which is something I've been in this industry 20 plus years, and that's what we've been talking about for 20 plus years. So we're finally seeing KPIs kind of break through and metrics that you can really use to finally secure that seat. Roman, I know that you've implemented the Onclusive framework at IHG, and I really would love for you to share some context around why you found it so useful.
Absolutely. And I think when we started working with Onclusive, it was a big shift for us because previously we were focusing on a lot of quantitative metrics. So, like the share of voice and volume and all of that. And I know a lot of companies, as you were saying, are still pretty much stuck at this stage. But now we're able to look at the volume as well as the quality of our content by using power of voice. So one example I always use, right? If you have a crisis, your share of voice goes up. Yeah, obviously, but is that really a good thing? Probably not. So how do you accurately measure the impact of the crisis on your brand? So that's where you look at the content quality, because it's going to include positive and negative sentiment analysis, along with content relevance, publication authority, social media amplification rolled into one single data point, which is so useful. And on top of this, I think one of the best ways to understand the value of your PR is to look at the bottom line impact using PR attribution. So we'll get into this a bit more in a few minutes, but I think that's something Onclusive invented. And Greg, I'm sure you'll correct me if I'm wrong. But yeah, I think that's something we use all the time as well. And it's changed how we report most of our campaigns.
Yeah, absolutely. And before we get into best practices, I do want to make a note that a PR measurement framework works only if everyone in your organization is on board with using it. Now, I know this is something specific to you too, Roman. It's especially important for companies like IHG that are not only large, but global, that have multiple communications folks in different regions, executives and agency teams everywhere. I know you and I have kind of talked about this ad nauseum before, but would you mind sharing your experience creating global alignment around PR measurement at IHG?
Definitely, and it was such a challenge for us. I mean, IHG is a huge organization, as you know. We have like so many different brands, different regions, different agency partners. So it can be a fragmented landscape a little bit. But what we did a few years ago is that we really treated this as a priority. And we also recognized that we would not be able to fix this overnight, right? So that was our starting point. We're like, yeah, there's no magic formula. It's going to take time to fix this, but we really want to do it because we feel it's important. So that was really step one for us. So what we did is that we created a PR measurement workforce, and it included colleagues from all levels, different regions. So we made sure it was really inclusive. And in essence, we all got together and we tried to figure out which metrics made the most sense globally for all of our brands. And we even talked about, which templates would make the most sense for us, which reporting templates which would make the most sense across regions, brand, all of that. So the big advantage of having a joint approach is that you can actually reach a consensus, right, by the end of the process. So maybe not everyone is going to be 100% happy, but you can find a happy medium for everybody. And I really feel that if the decision had been made at the top, right, and if we had told everyone, hey guys, this is how it's going to go moving forward, here's your templates, here are your metrics, I think we would have had a lot more pushback, and probably even some teams, just not using some of these templates. So that's really a joint approach that I recommend. I think it's very beneficial long-term, even though it might take a little bit of more time to get there.
Yeah, I started smiling when you were saying that, because I've been through that, right? Where corporate teams maybe in the US have implemented this measurement program, didn't get buy-in from any of the regions, and just start disseminating out reports a couple of months later. And what happens, right? The folks in different regions around the globe just look at this and say, I don't even know, this doesn't track what I want it to track. This is not what I'm doing. And it goes right in the garbage. And that might be harsh, but that's exactly what I've seen happen. So to your point, Roman, taking the time to roll out what your plans are before you actually decide on anything to the entire organization, all the stakeholders that are going to be involved around the globe, getting their buy-in, making sure their media that matter are included, and that the metrics and KPIs that they want are included. Having that, when you finally get around to disseminating down those reports, it's going to be, hey, this is what we all worked on collectively, and let's go ahead and now utilize these reports on a global level. So that's exceptionally important. And to your point, it takes a lot more time than just corporate making a decision in a vacuum. But that is exactly what you need to have a true global program be effective. All right, let's now talk about PR measurement best practices that you can use whether you're just starting out or all ready to go to the next level. The first one goes back to starting with measurement in mind. If you don't define from the get-go what success will look like, it's really, really difficult, if not totally impossible to set the right goals, to develop right strategies, measure how well you're doing on the way there. This really does mean planning. Planning must be a part of PR measurement, and measurement must be a part of the plan. According to AMAC's Integrated Evaluation Framework guidelines, planning ahead begins by asking two big picture questions. Number one, what is the human problem you're trying to solve? And number two, what is the business impact you're trying to achieve? And how can communications realistically contribute towards that? So Roman, what's your take on this?
Yeah, so it's an interesting question, right? Because especially the first point, what's the human problem you're trying to solve? To me, it can sound and feel a bit abstract. So I think another way to look at it is thinking about your stakeholders and really listening to them, right? So how do they define their top needs and challenges? What keeps them up at night? One question I always ask all my stakeholders is, how can I make you look good, right? What's going to help make you look good to your boss, to your stakeholders? How can I help with that? And I think that creates a completely different dynamic. And once this type of research is done, it's going to help you frame a solution that's most likely to resonate with them. So that's almost a step one to establish that foundational support. And then obviously you want to consider the desired business impact of your comms plan. So the way you define it, of course, is going to depend on your industry, how your organization measures its overall success. And traditional PR metrics like brand awareness, share of voice are essential, still very important. But connecting comms efforts to tangible business impact has become even more important. And I think that's what we're going to get into. It's not impossible, even though we're top of the sales funnel, awareness, historically, we can provide more than that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and that's what this next one is all about. We see this all the time, over the years. Communications teams that have clear objectives tying into business goals and that use consistent metrics to assess their progress against those objectives not only have stronger results, but are also able to contribute to corporate strategy and really show how they're moving the needle at the organizational level. Just an anecdote around this. I one time went in to present to a large multinational organization. In prep for my meeting and my presentation, I read the first, few pages of their annual report, their most recent annual report, and I was able to pull out their corporate objectives. And I had them up on a slide. It was probably my second slide after the title slide. And I looked around the room and I could tell the comms folks were all kind of like, where did you even get these from? And I had to explain that it was part of their corporate goals on their annual report. And so right there, that's a red flag to me. Like, why don't you know these? And why aren't and that automatically tells me your comms objectives are not tied to these objectives, which is also a red flag. So, if you consider your communications objectives and take the time to review your organization's overall business goals, the communications function should support organizational success in some way that is clear to your C-suite. So with that, Roman, how do you align your communications objectives with IHG's overall business goals?
Yes, we were talking earlier with Greg, and I think we were saying we could spend an hour just talking about this, but just if I had to list maybe 3 examples. For instance, website traffic generated through earned media can be tied to the business goal of acquiring customers, right? That's a pretty obvious one. I think building relationships with media outlets that publish really powerful stories that can result in new inquiries, then can be aligned with creating a new category in your industry. That can be another one. And of course, achieving a certain volume of article reader interactions. So I'm thinking about social media shares. That ties into gaining meaningful brand engagement, right? So just a few examples here and there on how you can tie traditional comms results to your bigger objectives.
Yeah, I mean, and even just to do the first 2 that we've covered now successfully and correctly, you need to start setting the right objectives and developing like a really solid plan. Communicators need access to the right data, of course. PR planning must begin with knowing your audience, and data, and this world of big data has become so critical, a strategic pillar for winning. That's where data and measurement tools come in, like Onclusive and others. So you can leave measurement automation to a subject matter expert while you continue to focus on things that you do best, right? Like media relations, of course, storytelling, and your communication strategy. And of course, what we just talked about here, using the PR measurement frameworks that we've showed you. The good news is there is no need to figure out PR measurement on your own. Besides the support you can request from your marketing colleagues, there are many solutions and tools available on the market. Roman, I do want to ask you about how IHG uses data and technology for global PR measurement. I believe you're going to share the results of a specific campaign that was fairly important to the travel industry over the past couple of years. So I'm going to turn it over to you.
Absolutely, yeah. So I'm going to walk everyone through a case study. So this was our Clean Promise campaign that we launched in June of 2020. So I'm not going to spend too much time on explaining the context. We've all been through it. June 2020, so early in the pandemic, but it's the first summer. Some people feel a little bit better about potentially traveling, but not a whole lot. And the hospitality industry has been hit really hard. So this is part of the reason why we launched this Clean Promise campaign, which, in short, we were highlighting all of our efforts around cleanliness and how we had redefined our standards around that, right? So we were using new science-led protocols and service measures. We were partnering with industry-leading experts like the Cleveland Clinic, Ecolab, Diversity, and we had launched a global IHG Clean Promise and a global cleanliness board. So our advantage here is that obviously it's something that existed before the pandemic. So we were not starting from scratch, which we were very thankful for. So we had a strong foundation, but we really made it a lot better through all the learnings that we had from the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. I chose this case study specifically because it's interesting from a reporting perspective. I know sometimes it's always frustrating when you compare what you're doing versus what a competitor is doing, because the campaigns don't align, right? They're going to be on like very different topics. This one and this specific topic was discussed by all of our main competitors, right? So every single competitor launched a very similar campaign, which from a reporting standpoint is very interesting because it's really more of an apples to apples comparison. So one of the first metrics we looked at with this campaign is the total number of target media placements that we achieved. That's kind of always our starting point. So for IHG, it's a combination of, you're going to have general consumer publications. So think about the USA Todays of the world. You're going to have consumer travel publications, but we also look at general business publications like Forbes, like CNBC, and also some travel specific trade publications. So as a starting point, very happy to secure about 10,000 target media placements, very successful. But of course, we wanted to dig deeper and look at a lot of other metrics. So when measuring this campaign and looking at the share metrics, we see something very encouraging. So first, definitely happy to see that IHG captured a 39% share of voice. So the most media coverage around this topic compared to our competitive set. But I'm saying this honestly, it would not have been a disappointment if we had come like second or third. I really think we're at a point now where share of voice sure is still important, but it's not the most important metric to us. However, by looking at our power of voice, you can determine whether or not IHG is generating more relevant coverage in higher authority publications with better tone, better sentiment, and if our articles are being amplified more on social media. And that's really, to me, that's really where you want to be, right? You don't want, it's quality over quantity. It's the old saying. So you'll see here that we improved from a 39% share of voice to a 59% power of voice. which is, yeah, to us, it's absolutely paramount. And that's something that we've established in our organization as being our main objective.
Because historically, right, Roman, you're showing the first pie chart, right? Historically, you're showing the first pie chart and it gives you some information, but not necessarily the big picture. And this is something you can do on your own, right? Add some qualitative metrics to your data. Now you're showing these side by side, and it's got a lot more resonance with your stakeholders. And even, and we're not going to get into this, but even, whoever that competitor was at 9% in the share, they've stepped up their game with this particular campaign. And it's interesting with this campaign, you don't typically see your competitors doing the same campaign as you, but in this instance, everybody was on this cleanliness kick, right, at the beginning of the pandemic. And so you've got a lot of stories to glean and tell from here.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, you're spot on, Greg. And it's, I will say we're not often first in the share of voice pie charts, but it's, like I said, it's fine. You don't need to have the most amount of articles, and you don't want to be judged on that necessarily. It's about the quality of the articles and the placements. So in addition to power of voice, we look at some other specific performance indicators. So for example, here you can see the volume of social media engagement our Clean Promise campaign earned. So Onclusive considers any engagement with an article as amplification, because anytime someone likes, shares, retweets, it's amplifying that content. So not only did we generate a significant amount of target media coverage, but that coverage was boosted across social media very consistently months over months. And as we all know, I hate the brief when someone asks me to make something viral, but the goal of any modern communicator is not only to get a great article written, but also to get it shared, right? Because that means people really cared and really read the article. We don't always spend a ton of time on tone and sentiment as its own metric, but to me, it's an incredible story for this specific campaign, because if you remember, we're at the height of the pandemic. Media sentiment around COVID and travel and accommodations was very low, but even with all of that, coverage from our Clean Promise campaign was 98% positive or neutral. So only 2% of the articles were negative in sentiment. So I think our team did an incredible job here, really framing that story and making sure that the tone was spot on and generated such a great response.
Yeah.
And finally, and I think it goes back to everything we've been saying, Greg. Not only our coverage was high quality, good sentiment, it also drove bottom line business results for us. So maybe if you had to remember just one slide, that might be the one. But with the PR attribution technology, we're actually measuring how our earned media coverage drives readers back to our websites. So either to learn about the specific campaign, to learn about IHG Hotels and Resorts in general, to learn about some of our brands. But as you can see, we generated about 43,000 website visits from this campaign. And I guarantee you, if you can take these types of hard metrics to the table when you talk to your marketing team, when you talk to your C-suite, they look at you completely differently, right? It's so much more powerful than just saying, hey, we got X amount of impressions, we got some great stories. That's at another level right there. So we always try to get these little nuggets, these little insights, because it makes us look really good.
Yeah, I mean, that's all of these slides, that one in particular, it's just a fantastic results, Roman. And I know that the team, you've congratulated them on multiple occasions, especially when it's a unique situation like the pandemic, and the fact that all the other competitors were doing a similar campaign. To be able to track it and show these metrics is really successful. So congratulations on that. We're getting close to Q&A, but before we do that, I really do want to pick your brain a bit on what you think, Roman, is important for communications pros to consider when they're looking to maybe grab a partner in PR measurement.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's become one of my favorite topics just because I spend so much time when we're looking for a new reporting partner and a measurement partner. So I think you have a lot of different factors to take into account, really. But so maybe number one, make sure the partner you're selecting can capture all the media channels and formats that are essential to your business. And think big picture, right? So think digital, think video, think print, obviously, but think also about social, about blogs, about can they capture podcasts, for instance, right? Think about all of these different media types. Because the more data I think you have at your fingertips, the better your insights will be. And you don't want to be put in a position where you get asked a question, but you have a partner that can't quite track the results because they're not tracking podcasts, for instance. Second bullet, you also want accurate media database and a good PR CRM. You'll want to measure which journalists, which influencers, which bloggers are creating value for your brand. And in order to do that, you need an accurate and current media database, right? So make sure you ask, because the media database can be accurate when you look at it, but make sure you ask how often and in which ways the database is being updated, right? Is it updated every week, every month, every year? Is it on an ad hoc basis? Can they just add more at your request? So I think human curation is really important here too. But that's really important. And obviously a PR CRM will help you keep track of your pitches, who they went to, how journalists engage with your communications. So all of this is super important. The next bullet really depends on the size of your company and team and where you are on your PR measurement journey. But if you want everything automated, easy to set up, use on your own, you can ask about their standard offering and templates. If you have special needs, which I know we did, so I asked Greg and the team a lot of questions at the beginning, but if you need custom metrics, if you need modified dashboards, if you have a global organizations, you're going to need a comprehensive solution with like significant customization and significant support. So ask about that. If you're a global company like us, you also want to make sure that your PR measurement partner can serve the needs of multiple regions, multiple business units. So can you customize regional dashboards? Does it work in multiple languages, right? Maybe it's not just English. Maybe you want to look at articles in German and French and like other languages. So all of that is also key, and that's something you should forget. And finally, and I know I sound like a broken record, but it's so important. The modern standard of PR measurement must include the impact of PR on your bottom line, right? So ask if your measurement partner is able to connect your comms activities to business results, right? So can they track website traffic from your earned pieces, desired action, revenue, and how do they actually do this? So ask about their methodology, ask a lot of questions. And finally, I know I've been talking for a long time on this slide, but there's a lot to say. I think two important aspects are often overlooked. Number one, you want to understand what you can expect if you have questions, if you have technical issues, if you need some help figuring out a feature. So I know it can be hard to get a sense for this during the selection process, but try to talk to either past customers or current customers. So go out of your way to do that. I've found it to be super valuable. And last but not least, is the platform user-friendly, right? So the platform can have like 25 of the top features you're looking for, an accurate database, all of this. If the platform is not user-friendly, if it's a pain to use and you need like 25 training sessions to just use the basics, I guarantee you, your team is not going to use it, right? So don't spend a ton of money on a platform that's not user-friendly. I almost should have started with this. That's a huge turnoff for me, right? The platform needs to be easy to use, at least the main features. Otherwise, it's going to be an uphill battle for you to make your team use it, and you don't need that headache.
Yeah, I mean that's a big one, and all of these points, Roman, are really something that everybody should keep in mind when they're looking for a partner. Okay, Q&A time, right around when we were supposed to do this at a quarter of, so I'm glad we're on time. We had a lot of stuff to cover in this webinar. I'm super excited to be able to get all this content out. Let me pop open the Q&A here and see. Okay, so here's a good one. Right off the bat, someone recognized that IHG is not just IHG, right? It's a bunch of different hotels. So one question that we're seeing is, what are the most important things to consider when setting up a measurement program across a portfolio of brands?
That's a great question. And I think it goes back to the very beginning of our presentation about the standards that you want to establish, right? Because the last thing you want to do, so I think we're at 18 brands right now, which is a ton, right? But the last thing you want to do is to have one brand reporting on a set of KPIs and another brand reporting on a totally different set of KPIs. And then it becomes impossible to know who's doing well, who's not doing well. Campaigns are impossible to compare. And even when you do talk to your C-suite, you can't go to them with like totally different sets of metrics, right? It might take a little bit of time to educate them on some key metrics. So for instance, I'm thinking when we started working with the power of voice, which is a metric that's specific to Onclusive, we had to educate our key stakeholders and tell them what that was, right? So just picture it if for one brand we do that, and for another brand we do something completely different, it just looks completely disjointed, right? So working on these standards up front, I think is absolutely key.
Yeah, I agree. Let's keep, I'm just looking through here. There's a lot of questions around print coverage. So that's interesting to me because, Roman, rolling out a global program, you'll know that in the US, right, because you're based in Atlanta now, and in the US, digital is king, right? Print has kind of gone and taken a back seat, but in the rest of the world, APAC, Europe, print is still very much relevant. And so how have you tackled that? I know we can provide print coverage through our vendors, but how have you kind of talked about print coverage and including that in your measurement to your team?
Yeah, that's a good one as well. And I think you're spot on, Greg. I think different markets will have different approaches. And I think we had a really, we had a good group when we selected a partner, which allowed me to see that, yes, indeed, for instance, in the UK, they were really big on finding a partner that could track print coverage. And also for luxury brands, there was definitely a need to make sure our partner could track some very specific luxury publications that may not put all of their articles online, right? So it's definitely not as important as it used to be for us, but definitely also something that still needs to be included.
Yeah, I agree. And what we've seen is, that print is still very much important, and absolutely broadcast as well. If you care about broadcast, it should be included in your metrics. And that's another thing to maybe check with your potential partner is, hey, where do you source your print? Where do you source your broadcast? How comprehensive is that? What regions are important to you might matter as well. So good question there. A lot of questions around our power of voice. I will just say that power of voice is a metric that we provided on Onclusive. It takes into consideration the relevance of your brand mention within the article. It also takes into consideration the domain authority or the size of the publication, and also social engagement around those articles. So it kind of combines all of that, and you can also turn it on or off for sentiment as well. Another question around sentiment. I'll answer this one really quick as well. Some people asking about the accuracy of sentiment. I've used a variety of sentiment, natural language processors over the years, industry standards and such. And I will say that we have our own proprietary one that we launched a couple of years ago here at Onclusive. I really feel like it's fairly accurate compared to the other ones. But that being said, I mean, nothing is an exact science when you're dealing with natural language processors. So you always should make sure that your platform allows you to change that sentiment there if you want to, or just ask them a little bit about what goes into their sentiment making.
I wanted to just, Greg, if you don't mind, expand on something I said earlier about the power of voice, because as I said, it's this data point is specific to Onclusive. So when we started working with you guys, we quickly realized it was absolutely amazing to be able to get that, but it can also feel a bit scary to introduce a new metric to, especially to your C-suite, to the board, to people higher up, because you can get very comfortable just talking about share of voice and impressions. Everyone gets it, understands it, but you need to break out of that mold if you want to go one step further, right? So I know we had a lot of conversations internally at the beginning, and we were wondering, should we start talking about power of voice? And I know we asked you a ton of questions, Greg, but we ended up literally, I think we had like a couple slides on what made power of voice so impactful, just to educate our stakeholders and to introduce that new metric. And I can tell you, it's been probably a couple of years now. Now it's a metric they want to see every time, right? So there's definitely value in introducing new metrics that can be more powerful than your traditional ones.
Once you get a seat at that table, Roman, it's I mean, you're finally where you want to be, but now you're responsible, right? You've got to bring that data every quarter or every month or however often it may be. A little bit of a couple of questions here around smaller agencies and smaller niche markets. How do you measure? And I would say first, don't think that you're priced out of you partnering with someone. Definitely check your options. There are really good tools out there, not just Onclusive, that can help you get started with PR measurement on a budget. But that being said, you could do this yourself, right? There's a lot of great spreadsheets out there, and if you know basic formulas and pivot tables, you can grab all your content and export that into a pivot table and make a formula around what you count. Hey, this is our mention in the headline. I'm going to give myself 10 points for that, or whatever formula you want. You can do this on your own too. Small little one or two people shows. So don't be afraid to do that. Another question too, and this one's for you, Roman, is what KPIs tend to resonate with your C-suite?
So I think it's going to depend a little bit based on the campaign, right? Because we need to try to match the KPIs with the campaign objectives. I will say that it was a little bit of a light bulb moment when we were able to show that PR could drive website traffic, because people were so stuck thinking PR is just awareness. They never really believed that we could actually drive tangible results, right? So I think website traffic was a big one, and the social engagement that we generated is also another big one, right? Because then they realized it's not just social from our own channels, it's also all the social activity we generate from our earned media placements, which can oftentimes be even more important than what we generate from our own channels. So these two are very top of mind. Yeah.
Just looking through the questions here. Here's a good one. What recommendations do you have for measuring business impact for industries that don't necessarily move the needle via digital sales or interactions? So, beyond just website traffic and things like that, I would definitely say get more qualitative with your metrics. So if you're going to look at share of voice, which is, for the most part, quantitative, look at it through the lens of a very specific or target media list, right? That adds a bit of quality to that metric. So you can say to your C-suite, hey, here's our share of voice, but here's our share of voice in our top media, right? And here's how we're doing. Like if our competitor is kicking our butt in our top media, we'd want to know about that. So just little things that you can do to kind of use to make quantitative metrics more qualitative. I don't know if you'd add anything to that in your experience, Roman.
No, I think you nailed it, Greg. I think that's it. There's one question I was looking at, Greg, that asked on the share of voice pie chart. So going back to the case study, What were you searching for? Was it the phrase clean promise campaign? And I will say it's really important to pick a measurement partner that can customize the search terms, right? So it's not just as simple as being like clean promise campaign. It was a lot, I don't remember off the top of my head, but it was a lot more.
There was a lot of
in-depth.
Boolean involved in that.
Oh,
Roman.
yeah.
A lot
And,
of proximity and things like that.
completely, yeah. And it was the same thing for each competitor, right? So analyzing which keywords they use, what was the name of their campaign to make sure it was as accurate as possible. So that's another good thing to look at when you pick a measurement partner.
Did you see this one, Roman? Or can you talk us through the process, please, on how you did the global workshop to set your PR measurement framework, and how did you begin to roll out that to your stakeholders?
Yeah, it's goodness. This one was really a beast, right? And I think it was a very we were very mindful about getting people from our comms team from all over. So we had a really diverse group. And what I mean by that is that, literally we had people from the US, from Europe, from Asia, and we had people from all levels, right? So we didn't want just to have like, directors and above. We also wanted to have people who were actually gonna do the work, be in the platform, not that we don't do the work, but do the work, be in the platform so that everyone really felt engaged and had a seat at the table. So once we selected these people, which was really step one, then I think we met on a weekly basis, and we did have a deadline in mind. So I think it was like I believe it was like 6 or 8 weeks, something like that. And we met on a weekly basis, and we had smaller deadlines during that time frame, right? So we wanted to like first talk about the KPIs, and then everyone had some homework to do about that. And then everyone had some homework to do about the best reporting templates that we had seen across the business, right? And we brought all of this together, and we started fine tuning all of this. And at various points during the process, we would report back to some of our C-level executives to make sure we were on the right track. And that also allowed us to have a very open conversation about what they wanted to see, which is also important. So yeah, I don't know if I'm being specific enough, but it was I remember it was really challenging, but in all the right ways. And I think we landed in a really good spot by the end.
But I mean, I think the key here is there needs to start with some type of communication to your internal stakeholders or regional folks that this is going to happen, right?
Absolutely. Yes.
And that once it happens, we want you to be involved, and you're going to be involved throughout the whole process. So it is a process. I wouldn't say that you'd have to send out an RFP or something. I mean, if that's required at your organization, that's fine. But this is definitely a process, regardless of the route you take, and it should. And if you want buy-in and it done correctly, you definitely need to think about it strategically. So you have to think about it strategically just so you can then later think about communication strategically, right? But it's how it works. So good luck to anyone starting a PR measurement program. I hope that this webinar is going to help you. It is going to be recorded. I did see some folks ask some questions around, is this going to be recorded? It has been recorded. We will be sharing that with all the attendees afterwards. Roman, thank you so much. It was so great to hear about your rich experiences with PR and global PR measurement. Let's close with any kind of final thoughts from you.
I think for a lot of people, and I include myself in that group for a long time, I think measurement is almost like seen as what you do at the very end, right? Like it's like, oh yeah, we had a great campaign. Let's make sure we put a final report together, right? And you really need to have a different mindset if you want to do it successfully, and you need to start with measurement, right? So even, I think if you have to remember just one thing from this whole webinar, that would be it, right? Start with measurement in mind all the time. Even if you don't have all the right KPIs, if you don't quite have the technology, it's better if you do. But even if you don't and you start with measurements at the beginning, you'll be fine.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you so much, Roman. Just to quickly recap, measurement is the first step when it comes to developing your next communication strategy. And you can use the frameworks, best practices, and tools that already exist to help you establish and implement PR measurement across your entire organization. Once again, Roman, big thanks to you for sharing your thoughts and best practices based on your experience at IHG. And thank you everyone for joining us today. We'll be distributing and recording the recording to all registrants tomorrow. To learn more about Onclusive media monitoring and measurement, insights and consultancy, and PR and communications tools, request a demo or email us at info@onclusive.com. Have a great day, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.